This is Money Talk 1310 and 100.9. Welcome to the Real Estate PB&J Hour, hosted by Realtors Paul Fuqua and Joyce Carcase, who are experts in the fundamentals of buying and selling homes and other real estate properties. Now, here's Paul and Joyce.
Well, this is Paul Fuqua. Happy St. Patrick's Day. We are here, Paul Fuqua, Rosenwomble Realty, and Joyce Carcase, also my partner and Rosenwomble Realty. We are more than pleased to welcome you as listeners to the Real Estate PB&J Hour. Our goal in this show is to discuss as intelligently as possible, and that's why Joyce is my partner, the many aspects of residential real estate, from buying, selling, financing, renovating, repairing, and enjoying your home or other properties. There are so many aspects to the process of buying and selling real estate, and so many pitfalls to know and to avoid, that we strive to make each of the transactions in which we're involved as seamless and as transparent as possible. And that's why we do this show, and that's why we've been successful in our profession. And this is a special show. It's St. Patrick's Day special show. My grandmother was first generation Irish and carried that as a badge of honor to her grave. And it also marks 2.5 months of our broadcast. And if you wish, you can binge on all the past recorded shows on YouTube at the Real Estate PB&J Hour. And we hope that the discussions on this show are stimulating and informative. We try to be as provocative as we can be. We've had some excellent guests, and we have another one this afternoon. A little later, you'll be able to hear Cliff Hayes, who's a member of the state legislature and very well versed in this area. But our first segment is, as always, a market update from the lovely Joyce Carcase. Joyce.
Thanks, Paul. Happy St. Patty's Day.
Thank you.
So I do wish we had a little luck from the Irish when it comes to the real estate market, but so far the headlines are remaining the same. On Friday, Zillow reported that the U.S. inventory sank to about 729,000 home listings in February. That's down about 25% from February of 2021 and a decrease of 48% since February of 2020. It also marks the fifth consecutive month of declining inventory overall. Now, in Hampton Roads, we typically have not seen any movement in listings, but we did see a slight bump of home listings of about 3% this week. So we went from about 2630 listings on the MLS, and that was up from 2,500 last week.
Excuse me, Joyce, but isn't the percentage of sold properties within that active category actually increased? Because we were running about 43% of true actives that are not spoken for out of the total. And has it declined?
It has declined. Yeah, wow. We have about 39% that actually are considered active right now. And again, we continue to sell in under 30 days in all areas of Hampton Roads, the peninsula and the south side. So that hasn't changed either. And I guess really, the lesson there is, if you're ready to go buy a house, make sure that you get pre-approved from a mortgage lender or have proof of funds from your bank if you're paying cash, so you can really aggressively jump on these opportunities when you go house shopping.
Let's talk a little bit about what that means, the pre-approval. What you want to have done before you step across the threshold of a listed house is to have met with a lender, to have outlined for him your circumstances, to have provided him or her with all the required documentation of your income for the past several years, of your holdings and assets and things of that nature, and to make application so that you will have that on file, and you will have the opportunity to obtain from that lender a pre-approval letter which states that it is contingent upon an acceptable, ratified contract and a satisfactory appraisal. So you are now equipped to go out and look at houses. You also have an obligation to yourself and to the agent you're working with to inform them what your limits are. And some people make a limit predicated on the total loan. Some people make the limit on the total of the purchase price, and others make the limit predicated on what the monthly cost or operating cost for that property is. So the pre-approval requires action, overt action on your behalf with a lender. It's back to you.
Thanks. It's really good advice and something that everybody really needs to take heed of in today's market. So what we've been doing lately is obviously looking at some headlines around the nation to really see what's happening out in the market from a macro level, right? So CNBC had a post today, and it was about single-family rent prices are surging at a record rate, led by homes in Sunbelt cities like Miami and Phoenix. Danielle Hell, who's an economist at Realtor.com, she was interviewed on this during this post. She said that the housing supply is really in experience due to a hangover from the last decade, 2010 through 2020, and that 5.8 million homes needed to be built to house our population growth during that time frame. That's been interesting because the U.S. Census Bureau and U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development actually released their residential construction figures today, new residential construction figures, and they're stating that they are seeing an increase in housing starts. In February, we were looking at about 1.2 million, and that's above the revised January figure of 1.15 million. So that's good news. You know, we're starting to see that come up. I don't know how long that's going to take to ramp up to where it needs to be. That's the struggle we're having today, but the demand's there, and right now we need to figure out, obviously, where the remainder of the houses are going to be coming from.
Isn't that 5.8 million homes the deficit in new construction that is projected over those 10 years? In other words, in the past 10 years, we should have built 5.8 million more homes than were built.
That's correct.
And if you start, that's $585,000 houses a year. And we can certainly see that in this area where, because of the pandemic, there have been slowdowns in the processing of applications and rezoning and building permits because you don't have the staff or personnel, or because of the remote office situation, they just don't process as quickly.
That's right. And the supply chain has been impacted significantly. So
Definitely.
That's always been an issue with that too.
Well, is there anything in your readings that talks about why there's such a significant increase in rental rates?
Well, in rental rates is obviously because you've got a lot of buyers out there who cannot qualify for a loan because of the increased interest rates, or because, again, the lack of inventory, homes available for sale, so that they're actually out there looking for rentals. And the rentals have escalated significantly in our area as far as prices. You see, I pulled up some stats on RAIN just probably 2 weeks ago, and I was only seeing about maybe 350 active rentals at that point in time. Average rental price is about $1,500. And what can you get for $1,500 if you can actually buy a home? If it's available,
you can buy a $265,000,
exactly,
$275,000 house.
So it continues to be, like I said, it's encouraging to see that we've got some new construction numbers, and we see an increase in that, but we are lagging significantly behind. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few months.
We talked a little bit last week about the population gaps, the boomers and the X people, and now the millennials, and that was with Ron Foresta Jr. From Rosenwammel, and he emphasized the fact that one of the reasons for the housing shortage is that the millennials, who are aged 35 to 45, somewhere in that thing, are now coming back or not coming out into the market and want to buy. They generally have cash because they've been conserving monies. They've not been trying to buy with zero downs unless they're military, and they're ramping up the expenses or the costs of housing.
That's right. And, with remote work, it's really even pushing them further into that, because remember, the younger generations were the ones that were starting out in the offices, gone to remote. They're not going to go back. Sorry. They're not going to. They're used to, it's a lifestyle. It's really become a lifestyle for most everybody. You're introduced to something that we never even knew was an option before because it was not. it was the exception rather than the rule. So
Well,
it's making a big difference.
In the notes you gave me, there's mention of the Federal Reserve changing the rate, and they've announced that there's going to be a bump tomorrow. What's going to be the upshot of that for the home buyer who was in that affordable range, $350,000 to $400,000?
Well, like I said, they're going to be. They anticipated that there would be fewer buyers because you have a higher interest rate, right?
They're not real estate agents then.
No.
They don't know anything.
Well, okay, so this is interesting. I just found this as well. This is from Fortune. Bank of America had released a report, and they were saying that while higher mortgage rates would price out some buyers, it won't be enough to stop the housing market from posting strong home growth this year. And they're predicting that the U.S. home prices will finish in 2022 up 10%, nearly double the average annual homes price growth posted since 1989. And in 2023, I think this is good news, 2023, we're anticipating a 5% growth, bringing the market back to a normalized rate of appreciation. So we'll see if that actually comes through. I don't think we've seen any real consistency in these numbers. We keep blowing them out of the water every quarter.
All right. Well, we're going to be going to break here in the next several minutes. We please ask that you call in if you have questions on any of these statistics or any statements we make. The number is 497-1310, 757-497-1310. I know if you're driving, you can't make that call very easily, and you can ask Siri. I ask Siri all the time, and she says, no, I'm not going to do that. And if you're at home or you're on your computer, you can hear us at moneytalk1310.com, 1310 AM and 100.9 FM. We welcome the opportunity to interact with our listening audience, and we know that the individuals who have been guests on our show, such as our special guest this evening, Cliff Hayes, that they enjoy interacting with the listeners who call in. Now, I'm going to tell you that we'll be back in a few minutes. This is Paul Fuqua.
Joyce Carcase.
And this is the Real Estate PB&J Hour.
Welcome back to the Real Estate PB&J Hour on Money Talk 1310 and 100.9. Rose and Womble Realtors, Paul Fuqua and Joyce Carcase continue their discussion of the fundamentals of home buying and selling.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to the Real Estate PB&J Hour. We're just picking back up from where we left off in the overall market. I wanted to actually pick up with really an interesting stat, Paul. So this is from Housing
Wait
Wire.
a minute. There aren't that many stats that are really interesting unless you're following baseball or basketball. I mean, housing statistics suck.
I can't help it. I'm a total stat nerd. I am. Okay, so get this. So this was a study that came out from the National Realtors Association. It was just released. They said that homeowners gained $8.2 trillion in housing wealth over 10 years. So nearly 980,000 middle-income households became homeowners from 2010 to 2020. And they particularly gained $2.1 trillion in housing wealth. Okay? Then you go down.
Can we put that in perspective?
Yeah, we can. But I did want to hit this first, though. Okay. The vast majority, 71% of this wealth was generated by high-income households, while $296 billion, or 4%, was from low-income households. So that, you can put that into perspective as well. Overall, when you're looking at the wealth gained in the 10-year period, this means that a homeowner who purchased a typical single-family existing home 10 years ago.
This is the meat and potatoes.
Yeah,
PB&J right here.
That's exactly right. And this is an existing home. 10 years ago, at the median sales price of $162,600, is likely to have accumulated $229,400 in housing wealth. And 86% of that wealth was attributed to price appreciation. And where do you think that price appreciation really kicked in?
Where?
The latter part, particularly.
The past several years.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with the pandemic. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the issues that we're going to be discussing in a few minutes is just that, in that housing is a source of familial wealth in this country, a huge source. And for the normal wage earner or the person who's at a middle income, and there's nothing more valuable in his life than the house he lives in. And after 20 years of ownership and having paid a significant portion of his mortgage down, he's sitting on, in essence, wealth. Now, I grew up not an economist, but I always generated the respect for people as wealthy. I felt they were the people who created jobs to make other people enjoy wealth. When I've mentioned in the past that I started a company at an early age, and it was successful, and I had a bunch of employees. I think 70 was the highest number at any one time. But I looked across the history of all those folks, and they all end up buying houses. They all ended up educating their kids. So I felt that I'd done my job becoming wealthy because I was helping create wealth for other people, while at the same time, I lived a very comfortable lifestyle. No question about it. And the rewards of hard work and effort and being halfway smart, actually smart enough to realize how stupid I was, because my key to my success just in that venture and in real estate has been to surround myself with people like Joyce who are a hell of a lot smarter than I am, because they can do and they can understand what I don't, and they can guide me down the path of the ridiculousness of my lack of intelligence in many areas. So I digress. Please go ahead and continue. I get in front of a mic and I got Cliff Hayes here and I'm nervous. So go ahead. Where else are we?
No, and I think that's, like I said, that's really important. I think, and that is probably the most gratifying part of being a realtor, is the fact that we really can help educate individuals who are looking to buy a home, and those that really think that it's never even an option for them. It's always really, for me, gratifying to really see where we're going to go with them and find opportunities with them. And maybe later you can talk about some of the creative things that you've been doing, Paul. I mean, we do get some very interesting situations where, we really want to help. And
a little later in the show, I'll talk about a recent case where a client that was having difficulty finding something, we found him something, and it's actually been very beneficial, and it's going to close in the next 10 days or so. But I think it's time to introduce our honored guest. I'm going to let you do that, Jules.
Okay. Yeah, and I just really selected a few things out of this. We're honored to have our special guest, Cliff Hayes Jr. of the Virginia House of Representatives, 77th District, with us today. Delegate Hayes has been serving the 77th District since 2016. I hope I got that right. He's a native of Hampton Roads, was born and raised in Chesapeake, Virginia, attended Oscar Smith High School, and was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Graduated from Norfolk State University with a degree of Computer Information Systems. He is an experienced and highly credentialed CIO and Director of Technology as well. He served on the City of Chesapeake Council from 2004 to 2012, and has numerous accolades. I am only going to pick a couple of them. The most recent, he received an award from the Richmond Technology Council Legislator of the Year, Virginia League of Conservation Voters Legislative here, and many, many, many more. So thank you for being here today, Delegate Hayes.
Well, thank you so much, Joyce and Paul. It's an honor to be able to be with you all on today, but I must say the greatest honor that I can think of for me is to be the eldest son of Clifton and Carolyn Hayes. They poured so much love into my brother and I growing up that it's something that we certainly did not deserve, I don't believe, to the level in which they then raised us and poured into us, and continue to do so even to this day. Secondly, just a blessed man to have a wonderful wife in Kesia, brothers Hayes, and two wonderful daughters, Tonicia, who's a L3 student at the University of Maryland Law School, about to graduate in May, and Felicia, our youngest, who is working on her master's degree from William & Mary in early elementary education there at William and Mary. She graduated undergrad there and working on her master's, and they have devised this plan for a grand celebration May. They both will be graduating, and so we're excited about it.
Congratulations.
Where are you going to have the party? Is it going to be in South Norfolk at the City Park in South Norfolk, right by the lake?
Well, they have devised a plan, and my wife has told me just to listen to whatever it is that they want. And so since Donicia is in school in Maryland and Felicia is in school in Williamsburg, my wife has directed me to find a place in Richmond to have this celebration. So there you have it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you've been a successful politician since what, 2006, whatever the date was, when you first ran for and you were elected to the council in the city of Chesapeake. Now, you were a star athlete. You played football and baseball at Oscar Smith. You went to Norfolk State. You played D1 baseball for Norfolk State. You've been receiving accolades for your athletic prowess and your intellectual prowess ever since. Why did you use all that energy and expend it on politics?
Well, actually, Paul, it all started when I decided after my career in baseball at college level at Norfolk State, I decided to give back to the community. I had learned so much fundamentally about the game that I did not know as a child, but decided to give back and went back to the same community and league in which I grew up playing ball in. That was the South Norfolk Boys Baseball Association. Was welcomed there as a coach and went on to be the manager of one of the older leagues there, actually managed a league. And, of course, on opening day, as these leagues have, the mayor came out to throw out the first pitch. And then Mayor William Bill Ward had been my African-American history professor at Norfolk State University, as well as a seatmate at church at Mount Zion Baptist Church, now in the Berkeley section of Norfolk. He looked at me and saw me out there. He said, "Man, what are you doing out here? I didn't realize you were coaching baseball," and invited me out to be a part of an organization called Chesapeake Men for Progress. And I decided to do a little research on the organization and asked my boss at the time, who was Ray Connor. I was working for the Commissioner of Revenue's office. And Ray, as you know him, was a very thorough in his research in the history of Chesapeake, pulled out all kinds of news articles and materials on the organization. And I decided to go to that meeting. Went to the meeting, and the rest is history. I sat at the feet of some very wise gentlemen and ladies, actually, who helped unfold and develop and mold and shape what we call the city of Chesapeake today, and was very humbled to be able to be around folks like Sheriff John Newhart, Ray Connor, Bill Ward, Dr. Hugo Owens, and the list goes on and on. But just sitting around those folks got me really, really interested in the civic engagement piece. And, of course, my father emphasized that in our household that we stay engaged as well. And so I guess after serving for so many years with that organization and other organizations and being around the city hall, so to speak, eventually I was asked by a group of friends who I was playing adult softball with, a bunch of firefighters, to get involved with the league that they had. And unfortunately, one of our teammates that I had become very close to perished in a fire off of Indian River Road. And the issue was their communications equipment, and the city had not funded and upgraded the communications equipment that they had. And so ultimately we believe that that was the cause for his dying, he and another gentleman who perished in that fire. Then they said something needs to be done. We need to get behind somebody for city council. They asked me to consider running, and I said, I'm too young for this, is what I thought. But then on the flip side, then you had a mayor of our city. I had, I think, 4 first citizens to come to me and be a part of my campaign and helping me to learn this process. It was Ray Connor, who was the first citizen, John Newhart, who was the first citizen, Bill Ward, who was the mayor, he was the first citizen, as well as Dr. Hugo Owens. And they say, we'll help you. And so I decided to step out on faith with those gentlemen working with me. I was successful. I was the top vote getter in that election in an at-large seat in the city of Chesapeake and was reelected. That first election was 2004, and I was reelected in 2008. And then again later, by a domino effect, if you will, Senator Yvonne Miller, who represented the 5th Senatorial District, passed away while in office. Then Delegate Kenny Alexander decided to run for that seat. He ran for that seat and won. But then when Paul Frame stepped aside as mayor in the city of Norfolk, Kenny Alexander ran for mayor and was elected, which created an opening for the Senate seat. Delegate Lionel Sproul ran for the Senate seat and won, and it left a vacancy in an area in which I grew up, in which my father grew up, in which my wife's family grew up, my mother grew up. There in South Norfolk is pretty much the primary portion of that district. I ran for that seat in 2016 and won, and since here we are in the House of Delegates.
You know, the idea that you had mentors who have influenced not only your life, but hundreds, if not thousands of other lives, black and white, is one of the elements that I feel needs to be buttressed throughout our society. And I'm not talking black, white. I'm talking about throughout our society. I was very fortunate in my early business career to be mentored by a very successful businessman. And he guided me, and he offered me advice without telling me that I had to do this or I had to do that. Is that the experience you found, that you weren't given instructions, but you were advised, well, why don't you consider this, and maybe you'll think about that?
Well, I got some very good advice from my father, even as an athlete, a young athlete. And he always said that you need to, one, always pair up with somebody who is in a role or position that you would like to play in, and watch them, learn from them, and at the same time, find someone who's behind you, who's interested in playing, and you should work hard at trying to teach them what you've learned. In other words, as the saying goes, to teach is to learn twice. And so I've always used that philosophy, whether in athletics or in school or even in the vocational world. As you traverse and try to learn more about your vocation, it's good to find a mentor at work, and as well try to find someone that you can mentor.
With your background, Cliff, one of the situations that I see, and I've got enough years on me to have a perspective that's beyond just millennials and X and baby boomers and whatever the new generations are, but I see a need for making education become a priority, a major priority in all lives these days. And I don't see as much fervor, and I apologize that I'm becoming emotional in this regard, and we're kind of digressing from real estate, but real estate is life for me, and real estate is homes for people and realizing dreams. And it's difficult for me to imagine kids that are out there in their late teens and 20s not having achieved an educational level that they could, so that they could be absorbed into the middle class or the upper middle class, or that they could afford to begin saving so that they can tap into this wealth that is created by residential housing. And I'm going to ask you now, you're a legislator, what can the government, state and local, do? I'm not talking about the feds, because they really don't impact us directly. what can our state government, what can our local governments do to enhance the educational experience and expand it so that a person who may not be a traditional learner but is a superb mechanic has an opportunity to pursue a trade?
Yeah, I think it's very important that government actually uses the role in which it was formed to influence policy in that respect. So we have to make sure that we're preparing a pathway for young people not only to get and further their education, but for those who are not interested in going further on to a 4-year institution or even a community college or a 2-year institution, that they actually get some type of trade that's most important. You talked about education. I think it's most important that we do emphasize education because there is a difference between just cheap schooling and trying to make sure that we have what we call a deep education, a fundamental understanding of where we are in this space and time here on earth, and important to try to find what it is as your purpose as well.
We're going to take a little break to let the people who pay the freight have their say. You're listening to the PB&J Hour here on 1310 AM, 100.9 FM. Cliff will be adding to the conversation even more when we return. Look forward to seeing you then.
Welcome back to the Real Estate PB&J Hour on Money Talk 1310 and 100.9. Rose and Womble Realtors, Paul Fuquay and Joyce Carcase continue their discussion of the fundamentals of home buying and selling.
Hi, this is Joyce Carcase. I'm here with Paul Fuquay and our special guest, Cliff Hayes Jr. from the Virginia House of Representatives for the 77th District. We are actually going to continue our conversation. It's been pretty fruitful, I think. I actually have a question for you.
Yes.
So you serve on the Appropriations Committee, and you're assigned to the Higher Education and the General Government Capital Outlay subcommittees. At break, I was asking him a little bit more about that. What does that really mean? And I think you gave me a pretty good explanation. But what I'd like to ask is, for education in our area, what are your constituents telling you that they need the most? What are you seeing, and what are your resolutions for that?
Yeah, so in terms of education, it's always important for us to invest as much as we can in public education as a responsibility that we have. It's important for us to invest and infuse as much as we can in our teachers, in the support staff, et cetera, in our public schools. Just a few years ago, Virginia was below the national average in pay for our teachers, and certainly we understand the complexities of not paying these professions what they're worth. There are teachers that are leaving the profession in large numbers to go after, a better way of life, how they can be able to earn more to take care of their families. And so it's important for us to make sure that we are paying them what they're worth. Also, to do what we can to provide renovation funding for our schools, et cetera, to make sure that there are school counselors in our schools. We all know the important emphasis most recently that's being placed on the mental health of our communities, and certainly our children need that as well. And so we have school counselors that we're adding to that funding for K through 12 education as well.
Cliff, let me ask you a question. Your focus is education, and that's always been a key element in my life. That's the way I was brought up. That's what I was joyful in coaching in high schools and colleges. But I also want to come down to the inflow of monies into schools and the consequent better education of the kids gives them an opportunity to amass enough money so that they can come in and buy homes. You and I, we share somewhat similar backgrounds, but I didn't grow up African American. You did. I grew up in Washington, D.C. and did not realize I was in a segregated city because I played D.C. rec ball. I went to a Catholic school where there were black kids, and it was a normal set of circumstances. And we're talking about me in the 50s. And I know that your experiences were different from mine, but at the same time somewhat similar. You grew up in South Norfolk. Yours was a middle-class family. You're very straightforward, very dedicated to succeeding and achievement. Can you describe that for me and how that experience impacts your perspective of what the state and the city, and for that matter the feds, can do to change the results of years of city governmental redlining? We can talk about that a little later. But can you just give me an overview of your perspective? Because it's different from mine, I'm sure. And I think our audience would appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Paul. I guess just getting to the root of everything that you've mentioned, at the heart of it all is humanity, and for humanity's sake. You mentioned that you grew up as in Washington, D.C., playing sports and so forth. You're a white gentleman. I am a black gentleman who grew up in South Norfolk. But at the heart of it, you're no different than I am, and I'm no different from you.
You're a better athlete.
And so if you were cut, you're going to bleed red. If I'm cut, I'm going to bleed red. And I've even heard someone describe it as we both came from the same place to be born, and we're both going to end up with our
we'll turn to dust.
Yeah, it's going to all fade and go away. And so no matter who you are, that is the case. And so the question is, what will you do from womb to tomb, so to speak? And so
what can we do? What can we do to make it possible for a greater percentage of our population that doesn't have access to the housing market and the growth of wealth as others? And that's a consequence of government policies that go back to 1934, where they were cut off in 68 and then in 77 in terms of the racial profiling and the redlining. But there's a huge element of our society that does not enjoy the wealth building that others do. And what can we do now, if anything, other than let it flow naturally?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a gentleman, I guess an author of a book that I'm reading right now called The Color of Law, Dr. Richard Rothstein. And he lays out, I think, quite eloquently much of what has occurred and got us to the point where we are today. And much of that still kind of permeates, if you will, on the basis of where we are in terms of schools, the type of schools, whether schools are dilapidated or whether or not a school structure is well kept, whether or not certain kids are going to perform better because they're able to sleep well at night. They don't have to worry about hearing gunshots all through the night, or whether or not mom and dad is home, or whether or not there's lead paint, or whether or not they've developed asthma because of the environmental conditions in which they're living. Obviously, as an educator, you would know that that same child won't be able to stay as alert and awake in the classroom, which is going to mean that they probably won't perform as well. And then to further exacerbate that situation, you take a concentrated population of kids with that state and put them all in the same school. How can you expect for that school to perform on the same level as other schools, because of the school zoning rides on residential, right? So where you live is going to determine where you're going to go to school.
Yes, I am totally aware of that. I'm going to ask you a question, though. Why is there a resistance, and such a pronounced resistance, to vouchers, to school vouchers? We had them in D.C. for a period of years, and they were immensely successful and immensely appreciated, and kids could go wherever they could find the right set of circumstances for themselves instead of being in their districted public school. And yet I see a tremendous resistance to that, and I don't understand it, because I think that a kid who wants to perform, who wants to achieve, he's going to rise above what his surroundings if he has the support of his community and if he can have open to him the doors of opportunity. And that's where we've been slamming them shut. So if you live in the district down in Sursum Corda, and I'm going back to D.C., then you went to this public school, which was not well renowned, not well respected. Yet the kids, there were always kids that rose to the top. And unfortunately, a very small percentage. Yet you go 4 blocks away or 5 blocks away, and there was a school that had a different principal, and those kids, a much larger percentage, were able to move up and were able to compete in the academic world.
I think that's a great philosophy to have, but in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Constitution lays out clearly that every child will be afforded a quality education, public education here in the Commonwealth. And so what we have to make sure is that although you have some and a few that might, soar under those circumstances, the question is what happened to the masses of those students and that will be left behind. So that's a larger scope or consideration that we have to take into consideration when making those decisions. Yes, you will have some that under those conditions to succeed. And my wife and I, we're parents to one kid that went through public school, did very well, and one who went to private school and did extremely well. But we made a choice in that the child that went to private school, we had to pay for it. We had to fund out of our pockets to take care of that. And there are situations where there are scholarships, et cetera, and that's great. But our role as a state government is to take care of what the Constitution says, every child, and not leave any children behind at the expense of just a few being able to flourish.
Do you think that, as I do, that education is the key to solving, in large part, the de facto segregation that we have in this country as a consequence of redlining that started in 1934 with the Home Value Board and then the FHA red lines and the VA red lines that wasn't approached until 1960? Is education the key, or is there something that we can take overtly that would open up more opportunities for folks to buy houses? Look, I'm trying to stimulate business here, folks. This isn't a racial issue. I need more buyers and sellers.
Thank you, Paul. But the truth is, and just as you've mentioned, many of us lean on de facto as something that made all of this segregation happen. And it was not de facto. It was actually de jure. It wasn't accidental. It was intentionally done by the federal government. During that time, it was laid out that you literally could not sell your home to blacks. You literally could not rent to blacks. I mean, that was the law. And then, of course, there was the Public Works Administration, as well as the Housing Fund, corporation that lent the money, that allowed for the suburbia building of homes, and which created what we call white flight. And some have even described as a white noose that was around what they call urban areas. And with that, blacks weren't able to move to the suburbs, so to speak, at the time. There are even examples and situations, and I pointed to that book that I'm reading now, The Color of Law. Dr. Richard Rothstein points out an example where a gentleman who had been in the military, a white gentleman, and his friend, a black gentleman, Well, because they told the white gentleman he could not allow blacks in their neighborhood, he decided to buy another home in the neighborhood, bought a second home, and sold it to the black gentleman. He sold the house to the black gentleman, and then there were mobs of folks that show up bombing his home and all of this stuff. Ultimately, there was so-called justice in that situation, where someone was charged with 15 years, convicted, 15 years. They were jailed for, guess who? It was the white gentleman that bought his sold. So he was the one that spent time in jail for doing so, for sedition. So that's the kind of stuff. Even with my parents, when I was born, literally in South Norfolk, there's a railroad track that clearly anybody who knows South Norfolk will know. On one side of that track is predominantly black and African American population. On the other side of that track, it's predominantly white. And so at an early age, I grew up in a working class family. My father was, at that time, a milkman delivery driver, and my mother worked for the naval base. So on my father's delivery, out delivering milk, he went to a section of South Norfolk called Portlock. And so in his deliveries, he saw that there was a new development coming about, and he saw the chance to try to buy a home, and someone was kind enough to say to him, well, we'll give you a shot. So he bought the house in Portlock, and we moved to this middle-class working neighborhood, and it was an integrated neighborhood, so to speak. And so that was a great opportunity for me, education-wise, sports-wise, and a lot of life lessons as well. No question about it. Education has got to be the key for all of our kids, for us as a society as well, to make sure that our kids get a good education. Will begin a process of helping this situation, but ultimately it has got to happen through the policies, ordinances, and laws that we have as a government.
We have 2 minutes left, and I know that we've kind of moved off the center point of our show, but I think this is too important for us as a society to what am I trying to say? I think we avoid facing the issues of what was done in the 30s and 40s and 50s and not rectified whatsoever until the 60s and 70s, and it's still leaving us in a situation where a portion of our community, our society, does not have access to the greatest form of wealth building in the numbers that it should have. And we can point to all kinds of successes on both sides of the racial aisle, black, white, Chinese, Indian, whatever. And we cannot point to institutionalizing the segregation of neighborhoods nor people. That's my feeling, and I will stick to it forever. I want to thank Cliff Hayes for being part of this show this evening. Joyce, do you have any last-minute items to add? Because we're going to be going off the air.
No, I appreciated it, too. I think we could talk about that for another show, frankly.
Right. Well, we're getting the kind of hindsight. This is Paul Fuqua with Rosenweimer Realty, Joyce Carcase.
Joyce Carcase. You can reach both of us either at Fuqua Home Sales, FUQUA, or Carcase Home Sales. That's CARCAISE.com. And so join us next week, 5 to 6 p.m. here on Money Talk 1310, 100.9 FM, 1310 AM. And we'll be here with special guest Michael Vernon, founder and CEO of Flood Mitigation Services.
See you next week, folks. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.